The title of my talk today is TimeWorld. Does painting machine-generated images open a space-time of corporeal co-composition between humans and machines? To unpack this question, I'm going to share the results of a painting practice that I developed with images from the website This Person Does Not Exist, published in December 2018. This website, it displays images created by an AI that are sometimes indistinguishable from a photographic portrait, but in other cases, they betray traces of the computational process. So I call these traces soft spots, and I'll explain this term further momentarily. In the first part of my talk today, I will give some context for thinking with how looking closely at these images proposes a relational ethics. In the second part, I will describe the situated practice of painting these images and the findings that occur as a result of this practice. So, to begin, soft spots are areas of indeterminacy or uncertainty within the image, and often propose appearance-based objects or forms that seem photographic, but under close scrutiny reveal formal architectures that are based on photographic optical effects like overexposure, oversaturation, cast shadows, depth of field. At first glance, this image appears to be a photograph, but you can see some uncertainty on the left cheek, where the difference between shadows cast by the glasses and those that would be natural to the shape of the face are uncertain. We can speculate that this uncertainty gives rise to the apparent reshaping of the surface of the cheek and the chin. There is also some uncertainty around the boundary separating the figure and the background, such that the background seems to delimit and give shape to the hairstyle. And this is a subtle example. Soft spots can also be very pronounced, giving rise to jewel-like forms, or in this case, mother-of-pearl-like forms that appear inlaid or embedded in the skin. This image forwards a number of indeterminacies at the threshold between hair and the worn headpiece, between clothing and the background in the bottom corner over there, and between areas prone to overexposure and mother-of-pearl reflectivity. Amidst soft spot indeterminacies, alternate formal potentials are articulated. Here, hair, cloth, and background are configured into a plausible form that appears to be all and none of these things. Some patterns in the background also seem to repeat patterns in the hair, albeit in looser and more abstract variations. This focus on soft spots offers a way to reposition how AI-generated images have often been popularly received, which is premised on whether they can convincingly pass for or imitate an actual person. Joanna Zielinska suggests that such discourse cements a binaristic opposition between the human and the machine, which is at once inaccurate, citing the long and varied history of human technology assemblages, and forecloses the imaginative potential of thinking of the machine as being in co-composition with the human. Painting soft spots becomes a space-time of human-machine co-composition as it holds open new and inhabitable thresholds where affect and perception take shape. In the painting process, I actively sidestep the register of facial recognition since it so quickly absorbs the specificity of soft spots within a gaze centered on human resemblance. Here are some examples of paintings that I have made. This is the first painting. It was made in 2020. The dimensions are 40 by 48 inches, and it refers to and recomposes about 15 different renderings from the This Person Does Not Exist website. This is the second painting. It was made between 2020 and 2021. The dimensions are also 40 by 48, and it also refers to about 15 different renderings. Here is a detail. So while AI renderings are generated in milliseconds, Painting them offers an expanded temporality with which to access their heterogeneous and transversal constitution. This expanded temporality is both actual, the process is intensely time-consuming, and is felt as a virtual dismantling of linear causality. This occurs as the speculative materiality of computational forms replaces the appearance of material surfaces and made objects that otherwise conjure a sense of haptic and inhabited continuity in time. The careful study afforded by the painting process gives rise to a series of what I call findings. Findings mark instances of emergent perceptibility that coincide with appearance-based speculative generativities of the machine-generated image. Findings transform tendencies of photographic seeing, replacing the expectation of apprehending a discrete captured object with a kind of seeing that follows a compositional logic. Findings are always surprising and unexpected. A further point that needs emphasizing is that the gesture to capture within the painting process is always coupled with one that preserves and navigates opacity. This is felt in the painting process as would-be findings remain largely invisible, despite being in plain sight. The gradual unfolding of findings has the corollary effect of underscoring the persistent opacity of the image. Edward Glissant's notion of opacity is useful here. The concept was developed through the study of creolization in language, but also proposes a generative and ethical imperative that protects diversity within a broad range of relationships, both human and non-human. Glissant states, "In the opacity of relation, all the threatened and delicious things join one another without conjoining, that is, without merging. These are unities with interdependent variances, interactive totalities, which are not models, but revealing echo monde, or something akin to music." I liken these echo monde, or what we might translate as world echoes, to instances of emergent intelligibility that occur during the painting process. These events are in excess of the appearance of photorealism. Such events engender a kind of gestural seeing that maintains the ambition to identify computational patterns, but in a way that is embedded in postures of hesitation and ready acceptance of the incomplete. This reframes the discussion from one that pits the human against the machine to the potential to develop practices with and alongside machines that make time and space for new relational and perceptual affinities. So, moving on to the second part of my talk, I will now describe a series of beginnings, followed by some of the findings offered by the painting process. Beginnings describe modes of entry for developing a painting practice with the machine-rendered image, while pulsing new emphasis and advantages of unknowing and possibility. So, beginning one. Begin with a description in time, the time of blobs of drying paint that, when wet, slowly rotate in unison, pressing marbleizing contours into form before drying flat and still. The paint, once dried into place, refers to the matter-of-factness of its own material process in time. The dried blobs are a useful stand-in for the faces that I usually avoid painting, as well as the photographic reference to an instant in time. At times, they provide directional orientation for the composition and augment the indistinction between form and ground, which is already present in many of the machine renderings. The contrast between the painted objects and the marbleized contours also points to the difference between paint and painted image, and by extension, the painted image and an image created out of a computational process. Beginning two. zooming in and out of the high-res image, which does not appear to give more information of the same order, but makes visible different kinds of image attributes. In this image, there's a lot going on that's really interesting in terms of the unlikely adornment surrounding the face. Close examination of these forms reveals how they are composed, in part, of different versions of the threshold between hair, shadow, and reflectivity. Perhaps this starts with the opening to indeterminacy given by eyelashes that appear to fold into and define the surface of skin by marking striations of oversaturated green and magenta. Beginning 3, painting with a brush, the movements with and across paint-charged bristles that separate and conjoin within a single stroke, becomes a tentative holding place in movement that puts micro and macro views in co-composition, as well as the transversal referentiality of the machine-generated image. This doubling back of painting with a brush pulses vantages of the double take, which troubles image recognition and positions interest between and across scales, media, materials, durations, and techniques. Beginning 4, I observe hundreds of machine renderings, clicking refresh on the This Person Does Not Exist website again and again to observe a new image, with no way of going back to the previous one. I look for images with areas of strangeness or unidentifiability and take a screen grab without knowing exactly how the image may become a reference. After first impressions, faces become increasingly fleshy during the painting process. This fleshiness is something like that which occurs when tending to bodies in a way that requires some degree of suspending recognition. When applying makeup, washing a face, braiding someone's hair, or tending to an injury, when bodies are felt in intense durational co-presence. Beginning 5, piece together parts of images as if assembling a felt-like material, which becomes increasingly dense the more it is massaged with soap over time. This presents the image as a processual topography that can accommodate varying degrees of detail, density, and opacity. Beginning 6, mix the color of paint as precisely and as loosely as possible. Colors must be precise, but also intensely varied and tentative, ready to surface changing values, intensities, and saturation within a single brushstroke. Likeness cannot be achieved without closely following profiles of oversaturation and overexposure that constitute the GAN rendering, but which sometimes only appear after careful study and many failed attempts. Beginning 7, in the painting process, some parts of the image are tended to in fine detail and others are ignored. Often parts previously ignored or simplified are revisited, revealing a new finding. As soft spots become intelligible gradually and inconsistently over time, they maintain openings to further possibility, such that the painting remains in a persistent state of potential and unfinished. I will now share some of the findings that occurred as a result of the painting process. Finding 1, absence of form-ground distinction. Unlike photographic depth of field, the AI rendering registers do not fully regulate how objects are separated from the background or recede into the distance. The difference between form and ground is not one calibrated to designate more or less information, but marks probable thresholds of difference while generating new modes of formal and compositional possibility. Some examples of this include A, forms in the foreground appear severed or shaped by the background. Or in this case, background bleeds into and takes the form of pictured objects. We can see this as the ground appears to take the form of a hoop earring on the left ear in this rendering. The background also appears to transition between sky and cloth, which are perhaps conjoined by the appearance of thread-like extensions sourced from the color and texture of hair. folds given by a cloth surface, or the appearance of ripples on distant water. B, foreground distinctions are marked multiple times over, creating the appearance of superimposed image layers. We can see this in the frill surrounding the head here. C, patterns seen in foreground objects are repeated as a variation in the background, melding different object categories such that flyaway hair can seem to inform a grid-like pattern in the background. And you can see this in the upper left corner there, where the movement of hair is kind of repeated by the background. Here, curly hair proposes a pattern density that informs the decorative arrangement on the headpiece, the radial knit of crochet, and the background geometry that appears to loosen the further it gets from the source. This is the painted example. D, the appearance of threshold materials that are both strange and familiar. Here, an elaborate petal-like adornment appears to emerge from, infold, and reflect onto a background whose boundary is articulated multiply. Upon close examination, it appears held together by tendrils sourced from overexposed hair. Here is a similar example in the painted version. Finding 2, speculative materiality. Speculative materiality refers to the appearance of material configurations that present scenarios of temporal and spatial non-continuity, or alternatively, instances of speculative and immaterial continuity. One example of this is the appearance of a sodium-lit night skyline in the reflection of tortoiseshell sunglasses, despite the apparent brightness of midday sun present in the rest of the image. Here we see this skyline horizontally on the right. The horizontality of the skyline aligns with and is visually extended by the patterning and coloration of tortoiseshell on the sunglass arm and frames. Closer to the hairline, tortoiseshell texture affords the speculative possibility of growing a fringe. We see what appears to be threads or fray at the bottom edge of the arm. This co-composition of day and night, tortoiseshell texture, and skyline, hair, and frames provides an entry for painting a composition that gathers diverse forms, and in particular, diverse versions of machine-generated lens renderings. Lens renderings tend to be particularly interesting since they often belie an uncertain surface, sometimes appearing to press up against or cut into the eyes and skin. Some renderings appear plastic and painterly, affirming the relevance of painting technique for engaging the uncertain surfaces of soft spots. Speculative materiality also allows for highly specific material forms to emerge that resemble actual materials, but have no continuous material constitution or surface. Optical effects like overexposure and oversaturation can seem to both sever and hold hair strands together while giving rise to jewel-like forms. In painting this hair, it was really kind of remarkable to realize that what I was painting was more focused on discontinuity than the continuity of a single strand. So where two strands of hair would meet would give rise to an overexposed kind of tendril. And it was really that became the object rather than trying to kind of duplicate the length of a hair strand. Speculative materiality also allows for highly specific material forms to emerge that resemble actual materials but have no continuous material constitution or surface. Reflections of buttons that appear attached to the top-facing surface of cloth appear to shine through the cloth. The braid form pictured here is also interesting in that it also seems vacuum-packed or pressed into form by taking on a cloth-like materiality. And this is very different from the kind of the sequential process of braiding. And here's the painted version. In this example, shadow and reflectivity weave together here, this area like right under the lens. It's a very tricky moment here. In attempting to paint this impossible surface, I arrived at an impasse. painting and repainting in a slippery and confused loss of topographic orientation. Inhabiting this tentative and uncertain surface had the after effect of a felt destabilization of mundane or habitual surfaces as well, if only temporarily. Finding 3, form genealogies. Certain form-based genealogies appear across different machine renderings, which suggest different versions of the same generative logic. One example includes ornate headpieces, which conflate the difference between hair and cloth, and which can sometimes appear to be more like a headband and more like a hat. Here, more overexposed hair seems to correlate with oversaturated color, and curly hair with a more ornate variation of the headpiece. This is a detail of my attempt at co-composing all 4 of these examples together. Finding 4, major-minor dynamism. Just as the appearance of form and ground lose distinction within AI renderings, the difference between major and minor formal elements can also become indistinguishable. If major forms coincide with registers of photographic recognition, then minor forms present appearances that are irreconcilable with photorealism, even as they sometimes constitute them. So close attention to minor forms reveals a multiplicity of image compositions within an image, such that the shadow cast by a ball cap can appear to be one cast by a straw hat. You can see this in the little bits of light that kind of seem to shine through the visor in this instance. Or the angularity of patched together cloth in the hat seems to inform the apparent texture and rigidity of the surface of the skin on the face. And in addition, reflectivity here takes on a liquid quality, so as it goes from lining the bottom edge of the visor to kind of filling the ear with something that looks kind of like a cast or liquid metallic substance. Here, the reflectivity of wire glasses frames makes them materially discontinuous, such that they sometimes appear to merge with creases in the skin, and sometimes they surface in a way that's similar to that of stitched thread. This thread-like reflective materiality is repeated in the stitching of the hat. Here, overexposed eyelashes amidst a shadowed brow seems to inform the delicate, metallic, thread-like materiality of the woven hat. This high-contrast lighting also seems to correspond with the pairing of midday illumination and the stage-like lighting and aesthetics in the rest of the image. So, in conclusion, painting machine renderings opens up a space-time in which to formally and effectively reconfigure tendencies of photographic recognition. This means that painting image likeness cannot be achieved without repeatedly approaching the question of recognition in different ways, as the ambition to capture an overall likeness proposed by the painting process is rerouted in this multiplicity of uncertain likenesses. Recognition is foregrounded as a time-based process that must readily accommodate partialness, uncertainty, and opacity. At the same time, soft spots propose an imaginative engagement with recognition that supplants a sense of givenness with one of tentative uncertainty and potential. Painting becomes a means of attending to a kind of generativity that makes time and space for heterogeneous versions of human and non-human co-composition. So, in terms of what one might do with these kinds of findings, I've prepared a very brief kind of outlook in terms of how it might be relevant within an art practice. So, one thing that could be done is identify soft spots in other kinds of AI models and develop techniques of experimenting with them through sound, writing, close listening, or dance and movement. Because AI applies to so many different domains, there are so many different kind of techniques from art that could come into dialogue or co-composition with different results. So one could also isolate findings like the coincidence of the major and the minor and experiment with how they might become a premise for new painted sculptural VR or installation-based works. Or perhaps in a workshop setting, one could develop techniques to bring the impossible materiality of AI into speculative material situations by forwarding findings as propositions for material engagement. So, thank you. Before coming into this work, I was really doing a lot of multimedia work.
Okay.
And I have a background in ceramics and drawing as well, and also developing workshop settings with different kind of materials and techniques to understand kind of affect and how materiality and affect kind of come together to create a new sense of subjectivity.
Because if you're interested in how computer reframe our experience of space in a way, here it's people, how we present people, but also space. Would you be interested as a multimedia artist or a visual artist to explore more spatially, like go beyond the surface into the materiality of a space that would be inspired by what computer can generate?
Yes, most certainly. This is really kind of an initial step to try and kind of see the images, because so often they're framed in terms of whether they kind of look like an actual photograph, whether they pass for a human. So the painting process was really a means of kind of suspending that discourse and really finding new entries into this materiality and its specificities. So for sure, I would love to take this into different configurations and media and spatial and temporal situations.
I'm just curious, where are you at McGill? Are you in what department are you?
In the Moving Image Research Lab in the English department.
Okay, interesting. Welcome.
En vous écoutant parler pendant toute la conférence, j'avais en mémoire une phrase de Pablo Picasso qui disait que s'il y avait une seule vérité, on ne pourrait pas faire 100 toiles sur le même thème. Et avant de parler du contenu, je trouve déjà que c'est bluffant, les images qu'on peut obtenir avec l'intelligence artificielle, et c'est tellement varié qu'on a l'impression qu'au final, c'est plusieurs artistes qui ont fait l'ensemble des tableaux, et quand on sait que c'est qu'une seule et même machine, c'est encore plus impressionnant, puisqu'il faudrait 100 hommes pour faire des peintures aussi différentes, et une machine est capable de renverser, de créer autant de tableaux. C'est incroyable, mais ça fait un petit peu peur, et l'humain est en train d'être un petit peu remplacé par la machine petit à petit dans le milieu artistique. Et justement, le propre de l'homme, c'est aussi les émotions. Et j'ai ressenti des émotions en regardant les tableaux, alors que c'est une simple machine qui l'a fait. Et je trouve ça déjà bluffant d'un point de vue de l'intelligence artificielle. Donc, vous avez mentionné que vous avez trouvé plusieurs choses concernant ces peintures. En 4 points, vous avez trouvé une absence d'une forme et dans les plans. Concernant notamment que le premier plan et le deuxième plan est souvent pas très bien contextualisé. Il y a encore des petits soucis entre les différents plans, sur les portraits notamment. Donc on espère qu'on arrivera à régler ces problèmes de perspective. Et vous avez mentionné également qu'il y a quelque chose qui est assez impressionnant, moi, qui me bluffe, c'est tout ce qui est de la réflexion. Par exemple, on avait une photo avec une femme avec des lunettes de soleil, et puis la machine est capable de prévoir ce qui sera capable d'être réfléchi dans les lunettes de soleil. Donc c'est assez impressionnant que la loi de la physique s'est respectée par ce logiciel. Vous mentionnez également qu'il y a tout ce qui est concernant les formes généalogiques, c'est assez respecté, avec notamment les détails des cheveux bouclés sur un des portraits. Donc ça va, l'intelligence artificielle est quand même capable de reconnaître la diversité capillaire des humains. Et puis enfin, vous nous parlez du dynamisme qui est quand même assez présent, notamment sur les textiles des peintures, et que du coup, ça rend vivante encore plus la toile, tout à fait. Et en conclusion, j'aimais bien que vous parliez de ce qui m'amène à penser à qu'est-ce qui est humain de ce qui n'est pas humain au final. Et je pense que là, on a eu une belle représentation scientifique on est entre les deux, et une belle représentation visuelle dans votre présentation aussi, avec des émotions. On est entre la peur de quitter l'aspect humain d'un artiste qui peint à une machine qui peint, qui est capable de nous provoquer des émotions. Donc, une belle représentation de l'intelligence artificielle, selon moi. Merci pour votre présentation.